From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And here's what's coming up. A conversation with the Kansas Farm Management Association's Kevin Herbel about end-of-year farm and ranch management topics of importance to you producers. He'll discuss with us conducting a thorough evaluation of where your operations stand financially here at year's end and setting goals for 2020. Kevin specifically covers ways of identifying the farm's financial position and creating a cash flow projection for the months ahead. Later then, K-State's Charlie Lee provides an update on chronic wasting disease in deer and talks about what you hunters can do to help slow the spread of this disease. All this and more here on Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. This is the K-State Radio Network, and you're listening to Agriculture Today. Our first part of today's broadcast is devoted to a topic which affects virtually every agricultural producer out there as we round out this calendar year 2019, end-of-year farm and ranch management and planning. Kevin Herbel has joined us from the Kansas Farm Management Association. He's the executive director of the KFMA out of K-State. If you're not familiar with the program, it's been around for more than 80 years. Some 25 KFMA economists around the state working cooperatively with farm family members to provide production and financial management information for use in decision-making. Their services cover quite some territory with on-farm visits, whole farm and enterprise analysis, year-end tax planning and management, assistance with estate and farm succession planning, and so forth. And this is a pivotal time for producers, Kevin, to evaluate the status of their operations. You've advocated that year upon year, right?
That is correct. And certainly end of year, Eric, is a time where a lot of farmers do tend to think more about financial management than they do other times of the year. But there are some very important reasons why it is a good time to be doing so. I would advocate for the fact that we should think about financial management throughout the year at various times. But certainly here at the end of the year, some important reasons to give time to financial management of the farm, to assessing where you're at, to assessing why and how you use your records, what do you need them for, and ways of taking a look at whether or not you're achieving what you're desiring to accomplish by being involved in production agriculture.
And when it comes to this self-evaluation, you put it in the context of three main management points, you say.
Well, there's certainly the need to look at management of your overall income, your profitability of the farm. When we think about end-of-year activities, and most farms tend to be calendar year, you may be in a position where it's a fiscal year other than a calendar year, which makes this not be your year-end. But for many, income tax management is very important this time of year. And each of those come together with the very great importance to cash flow management and making sure those needs, those demands that are there for what's being generated by the farm are able to be met.
And you want producers to look at each and every one of those, not just one or the other, right?
Well, it's very easy this time of year in particular for everything to get, you might say, skewed by let's do this tax management thing, and maybe even seek to manage in a way that we're going to pay no tax or as little tax as possible. I would say from a management standpoint, there certainly is a need to look at not paying any more tax than's needed, but a goal of paying no tax is typically not a good goal for profitability and longevity of a farm operation. There needs to be a point of planning to pay the least tax possible while building the most wealth by building the most income potential that can be done on that farm operation.
So how does one adequately balance all of that to come to a more clear picture of where they're at financially?
Well, that's certainly going to begin with having good records. Yeah. We talk with that routinely, I think, whenever we visit, but the importance of having those records in an order that they're able to be used as we come to the end of the year. It's important to sit down with someone who does understand the tax laws, understand the implications of various decisions, whether that would be the KFMA economist for someone who is a KFMA member, your tax preparer for others, but looking to manage your income in a way that does meet your cash flow needs and meet your goals, positions you in a place to end the year in as strong a financial position as you can without creating a excess amount of tax being due to higher income than you might think you have. And this year there's a number of factors that could slip up on someone or sneak up on someone here at the end of the year.
Beyond the normal costs and returns to your operation.
Beyond just those normal costs and returns. And one of those that's very unique to this year are the market facilitation payments, or the MFP payments, that farms have received the last several years due to some of our trade uncertainties, trade issues taking place. And there are a number of farms that waited to claim their 2018 payment until a point in time where that was received in the early part of 2019. And then with the 2019 payment, 3/4 of those payments will have been received in 2019. So for many farms, thinking back or remembering that they actually took that 2018 payment in this year, they need to make sure and look back in their records, assess what is the case there. Also, a lot of farms, and this is always the case, and those who do quite a bit of deferred grain or livestock sales will typically know or remember that. But the level in which that has occurred can sometimes sneak up or surprise someone when they come to the end of the year and realize that those deferred grain, those deferred livestock sales, they end up in January being used very quickly to pay bills that are due or loan payments that are due, and the cash from those sales disappear very quickly from the accounts. But at this time of year, it's important to remember how much were those sales, what is the impact that has on where taxable income is as we end this year. And then there were also a number of farms that had crop insurance receipts during the year, and working through planning that appropriately can be important as well. On the other end, we do have generally agriculture in Kansas here for 2019. Incomes were better than we might have expected or planned for them to be for most operations. That's not for all. And when I speak to that, I'm often speaking to that from an accrual income standpoint, so accounting for inventories and the fact that we did have some pretty good yields at many places around the state. But there's a lot of farms where their grain sales have been slower this year as they've kind of held off waiting to see when the trade deal might be put in place, or when
if it will be put in place,
when things will happen such that we see commodity prices go up. And so there are individuals that have had slower grain sales due to the lower prices, and there's instances either for that reason or because of either too much water or drought conditions in some areas, instances where, or maybe due to financial position, instances where incomes are not all that good. And so we're planning for a lower income position, and that planning can be extremely important as well.
But it gets back to whether you kept track of all of this adequately. You hammer on the records theme, but there's a reason for that.
Certainly. If those records are not in place, it's really hard to assess where you're at as you come to the end of the year. It's really hard to know if you're making the progress you'd like to make and moving in the right direction. And it can be very difficult to decide you have an appointment to do income planning on December 10th or whatever that might be. And trying to get those records in order overnight can be pretty hard to do. Now, someone might be in that position now where they haven't kept their records up through the year, but do want to continually come back to reminding people the importance of keeping those records up to date so that they can know their financial position, know where they're at, and be able to assess that more easily at any point in time throughout the year.
Does one want to go about this in a comprehensive way for their entire operation, or is there merit in breaking this down enterprise by enterprise then?
Well, I think there I'll back up just a little bit and say for each producer, what next step is important is very dependent upon what is the most recent step or what have they been doing. And for each one of us, I think it's important to seek in making progress to manage better. And so for someone who's been doing very little from a record-keeping standpoint, just getting their records together at a whole farm level in a way that's consistent, a way that they can manage year to year, a way that they can pull information out of fairly readily to be able to look at where they're at, to allow them to do some benchmarking and comparisons with others is important. Now, for someone who has that in order and has been utilizing records at a whole farm level, the importance of having those records at an enterprise level, the ability to use those records to determine cost of production of enterprises, of what's been raised on that farm, is very important. And utilizing those enterprise records both to look back at 2019, at prior years, to assess kind of the progress or direction that things are going within that. But I think even more important from that, to use those records to help project forward for 2020 and even future years from that, to use your past records as a starting point to put together the information you need for planning and making decisions that you're needing to make on the farm. And records at the enterprise level can be very beneficial for that.
Well, Kevin, we do want to spend a few moments talking about closely assessing one's operational financial performance and setting goals for the upcoming year, all of which can be part of this end-of-year management approach that you're endorsing to producers, and we will talk about all of that after these moments away. Our guest is from the Kansas Farm Management Association, its Executive Director, Kevin Herbel, and he's lending some ideas that you producers might give due consideration as we finish up this calendar year 2019. We'll return with Kevin in just a few moments. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today continues now. In the guest chair once more, the Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Management Association out of K-State, Kevin Herbel. We're going over several things for you farmers and ranchers to contemplate on your end-of-year management decisions, finishing out 2019. You want producers, Kevin, to get a firm handle on the financial performance of their operations as they look back at 2019. What does one use to create that assessment that really tells you something?
Well, the one thing we'll maybe start with here is what you don't use. And a lot of, or most farms are cash basis for the purposes of tax filing. There are some that will be accrual basis, and in many cases, the accrual basis for tax returns that I've seen are more of a hybrid accrual and not a true accrual. So in many respects, regardless of what your type of tax filing is, the likelihood is very strong that the Schedule F is not going to be a very good place to measure or assess the profitability of your operation. And so it's important to look at some things beyond that and a need to make adjustments to that. A lot of times a producer will say, well, my bank's got the Schedule F and, that should be good enough. We'll give them a little bit of balance sheet information. But it's actually the putting together of the balance sheet with the cash income and expenses to arrive at what I would call an accrual adjusted income statement. A balance sheet isn't just something that you have to put together because your lender said they need to have it. It's actually, in many respects, more important to you than it is to your lender. As you're looking at assessing your financial position, performance, having that balance sheet completed in a consistent manner and doing so at a similar time each year can allow you to compare those balance sheets across multiple years, the ability to assess financial performance, assess financial position over time, and then utilizing some of the numbers, the inventories on that balance sheet, the changes in those inventories, the changes in accounts that are due, the changes in accounts that are owed to you, making those adjustments to your income statement to get an accrual adjusted income statement. And there again, the best place to be is having that accrual adjusted income statement for multiple years to be able to compare to yourself with yourself across time to assess progress. But as with anything, if that's something that hasn't been done, the need to begin somewhere is important, and to be discouraged such that, I haven't been doing this, I don't have 5 years to look at. You've got to get a first year to get the 5 years and get started in beginning to put your financial information in order to assess yourself against yourself over time. And I think that can provide a lot of information to help a producer understand, a manager of a farm, understand where they're at, where they've been, and some of what's brought them to that point.
And as we've visited in the past about farm management principles, one item seems to often come up as a difference maker, and that would be costs of production. Does one want to emphasize that, especially so when we look at this analysis?
I think as a farm is looking at assessing where they're at, looking to identify ways in which they're being efficient or inefficient, and ways in which they can make improvements. And in doing so, to even assess, so is this a high cost or is this a low cost? Are my machinery costs out of line, or does this make sense? I think the opportunity to benchmark, and we do have our KFMA data available where people can compare both at the whole farm as well as the enterprise level and assess expenses on a per acre basis on their farm. It's a combination of revenues produced and dollars spent. When we get to the end, what we're looking for is the most net income or net return on those acres. And it may not be a given enterprise on a given acre, but the body of those enterprises and activities taking place on their farm as they plant certain crops as part of a rotation with others, and how does that move them as a whole toward meeting their goals and objectives and being able to accomplish what they're wanting to, both from an agronomic, from a resource management standpoint on their farm, but also for a farm to truly be sustainable, they have to be managing the financial side of the farm in a positive way as well.
So far then, Kevin, we have been looking at the evaluation side of this. This is an excellent time as well as part of this overall effort to set goals for the next production year, and realistic goals at that. And you would encourage producers to get that ball rolling.
That is true. And one of the things we tend to choose to be involved in production agriculture because we like to produce things. The idea of keeping records and doing those things is not high on the list, but we get it done because we have to. The idea of setting goals and planning tends to not be real high on the list either. But there isn't this thing sitting out there like a tax return due or a lender requiring paperwork that says you must sit down and do this planning. You must sit down and set these goals and look at where you're headed. At the same time, the farms that I've worked with over the years that have been the most successful and have seen themselves as the most successful are ones that have spent the time, given the effort to sit down and set goals, and that can be done at a number of different levels, a number of different ways, but they've given the time to do that and then assess their progress with those over time.
One of the things that is often emphasized here is putting together a cash flow projection, being very detailed in that. You would advise that as well?
I certainly would. With the farms that I've worked at, ones that I've seen make the most progress year to year are ones that have given some time toward cash flow planning, toward assessing what they expect to be happening in the coming year and putting that down on paper. Now, one thing, as soon as we do that, right away we know it's not going to be right. Something's going to change and won't be the same. But that's not a reason to not do the process and work through identifying both what it is that you intend to do with each of the resources you have available as you go about your activities in this coming year. That's all the way from the inputs you need relative to accomplishing those production activities to when and how you might expect you would be selling those commodities that you produce. Working through this cash flow plan is going to include or involve assessing those costs of production on the enterprise level, which then can become a starting point for market planning for what you intend to produce. And as you work through this detailed cash flow plan, you know and assess when the cash shortfalls might be. You know and assess when dollars will be available to meet certain loan payments, and can put you in a position of knowing more about what you expect to happen in this coming year than maybe your lender knows about your farm, to put you in a position of going to sit down and meet with your lender from a place of knowledge and understanding about what you're seeking to do and accomplish on your farm. And that whole process, if you've not done it before, can be overwhelming to look at. And so thinking about a detailed cash flow plan for the whole year, maybe the detailed part of that you back up on a little bit and don't be quite so detailed. Just accomplish some of the things you can think through and find a individual that can sit down and consult with you to work through that process and assess where you're at. And when we think about goal setting, one of the things that's very important is assessing those goals and whether you've met them. And the goals set within just a cash flow plan for a coming year is something that's relatively easy to assess as you look at the next year and compare actual cash activity that has occurred back with that plan. But other items can also be involved in this goal-setting activity, all the way from looking to address the challenges, the risks that might be there in the coming year. I think all of us would say that the whole idea of trade uncertainty and weather issues are going nowhere soon and are a part of what we need to plan with. But each individual operation likely has other challenges and risks that might be different from what anyone else might have or anything that I might even think of saying today. But to assess those, to identify areas where improvements can be made and steps that you might desire to take to move forward on those in the coming year. And there I would certainly encourage people not to find everything you think can be improved upon and try to do them all in the coming year. Identify what can be maybe the areas where you can make the most improvement or what might have the most value back to you. But pick some of those things out and identify them as improvements you're going to work on. And those might be efficiencies to be gained, might be ways that you can work to be more effective in accomplishing what you're doing on your farm.
Daunting as all of that may sound, we'd be remiss if we didn't bring up that the Kansas Farm Management Association economists throughout the state stand ready to help producers follow through with all of this. And it's as easy as contacting the KFMA to explore that further, Kevin.
That's correct, and can certainly find contact information for the KFMA program on the agmanager.info/KFMA, where our specific part of the Ag Manager website is at. Would welcome an opportunity to talk to anyone who is interested. The contact there is both for our state office here on campus as well as for each of our local offices stationed at 11 different places around the state.
Very well. 'Tis the season for farm and ranch management evaluation and planning for the next year. Kevin, these are important things for producers to consider at this time of the year. We appreciate you spending some time covering all of this with us, and we'll talk again soon. Many thanks to you.
Thank you, Eric.
The Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Management Association out of Kansas State University, Kevin Herbel. Agriculture Today will be back after this break over the K-State Radio Network.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And next up for you, today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, for a look at the wheat crop status in Kansas from the USDA, as of this past Sunday, the winter wheat condition in the state was at 46% good to excellent, 38% fair, and 16% poor to very poor, with winter wheat emergence in Kansas at 92%, which is right on the average. As for soil moisture supplies, topsoil moisture this week, 3% surplus, 57% adequate, 40% short to very short, and subsoil moisture at 4% surplus, 60% adequate, and 36% short to very short now. The corn, soybean, and grain sorghum harvests are officially complete in Kansas, according to the USDA. Cotton harvesting at 71%. That is ahead of the 64% average for this date. On the national scene, U.S. producers making little headway in wrapping up the row crop harvest this past week, with those two major winter storms hitting wide swaths of the country at midweek and at week's end. Nationwide, the corn harvest has reached 89% complete as of Sunday. That is still 9% behind the 5-year average of 98%. North Dakota, only 36% harvested, Michigan corn only 66%, and Wisconsin at 66%. South Dakota has reached 80% completion on their corn harvest. The national soybean harvest, 96% done as of Sunday. The cotton harvest at 83% complete. Many farmers who sought to capitalize on the surging demand for cannabidiol, or CBD, expanded their plantings into hemp. Wholesale prices, though, for plant matter used in CBD production fell as much as 53% between April and October, according to the Wall Street Journal. Hemp, of course, the same plant species as marijuana, but with a minimal amount of the psychoactive compound, became legal because of a provision of the 2018 Farm Bill, mostly grown for CBD, which is used to treat seizures, pain, anxiety, and other conditions. The projected growth of the CBD market has enticed producers, the acres of cultivated hemp in the U.S. surging to more than 285,000 this year, up from 78,000 acres just last year. This item appears to confirm the warning or the caution that USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue said in testimony to the Senate Agriculture Committee earlier this year that farmers could swamp the hemp market before it really takes off. And the rise in hemp plantings comes despite the fact that it's not yet approved for growing in all 50 U.S. states. Meantime, Secretary Perdue continues to maintain that recent and pending trade deals will brighten future prospects for farmers. The USDA's Gary Crawford has more.
American farmers
are some of the most resilient people you'll ever run into. They just keep it on.
Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue in Atlanta, Georgia this past weekend, visiting with reporters after addressing the National 4-H Congress. He told reporters that he assured the students that despite low commodity prices and trade disruptions, those young people do have a bright future in agriculture. Reporters asked him, though, if farmers are going to need yet another round of trade aid, perhaps indefinite rounds. His answer to that?
I think if we can get this China deal done, where they've committed to buy virtually twice what they've been bought in the future, hopefully we won't need any. I think this will impact prices and being able to move products, and that's what farmers want.
Perdue said the trade agreements with South Korea and Japan will help the farmers' situation, as well as the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. That one, though, still awaiting action by the U.S. Congress. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
And Deere & Company has forecast lower sales and profit next year, predicting that U.S. producers will remain reluctant to buy machinery. The world's largest seller of farm equipment by sales says it will continue to cut costs in the response to the market weakened by trade tensions with China. The company cut production of farm equipment by 20% this past summer to reduce inventories of unsold equipment. Coming your way next on Agriculture Today, this week's edition of Milk Lines. Here's K-State dairy specialist Mike Brook. Mike?
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers about being thankful. You know, it's a time of year when we often look back over the past year and maybe over the past few years, and maybe we start to count our blessings. And as I think about that, I would hope the first thing that you count as far as your blessings would be your family and the opportunities that you've had to interact with them over the last year, over your operation and with your herd. Second thing, as I think about that, is the country that we live in, and the fact that we enjoy many, many freedoms that we do not see in other parts of the world. And then a third thing that I think about is the industry that I serve and that you serve every day. Has lots of opportunities, and we do have a wonderful dairy industry here in the United States that provides numerous opportunities for young people, whether it be the ownership of their own farm someday or working with organizations that are very progressive. We do have a very progressive industry that has met the challenges as we've come through the last few years, particularly when we look at some of the financial challenges that we have been through. As we think about the things that have happened and where we're headed right now, there's some bright spots in the industry as we look at milk prices increasing and relatively stable feed prices. This will again create some more opportunity for many of our dairies. We also serve a very rewarding industry, whether we work on a farm or we work with producers. We have many opportunities to influence people and to influence the American public. And I encourage you to continue to take advantage of those opportunities as they come your way. Finally, as we think about this Thanksgiving season and we think about things that we should be thankful for, we have a bright future. As we look down the road, people will still be buying dairy products off the grocery shelves, so there will still be a market for the raw product that we produce. We know that there's many opportunities coming our way in terms of technology and labor-saving things that will make us more efficient on our dairy farms. This is also very important as we maintain a competitive edge in the world marketplace. And that's another place that we have to be thankful. The fact that we still have very strong dairy exports. Yes, there's been some ups and downs, but when you compare to where we've been in the last 10 years, we are much ahead of where we were 10 years ago. So again, that's a blessing to our industry, and it opens up markets and opportunities for us to continue to market greater amounts of milk. So as you think about the last year and maybe the last few years, I hope you can find many things to be thankful for in the industry that we all serve. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to be thankful in this season of Thanksgiving.
Thanks, Mike. This is Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
This Agriculture Today concludes with our weekly segment on wildlife management. Aboard once more is wildlife specialist Charlie Lee of K-State Research and Extension. Well, Charlie, with the deer firearms hunting season beginning this week, you thought it appropriate that we talk about a troublesome condition that's widespread among deer in many areas of the U.S., chronic wasting disease.
Yes, chronic wasting disease is 100% fatal neurodegenerative disease that affects all species in the family Cervidae. That would be North American deer, elk, and moose. It was originally discovered in captive mule deer in Colorado at a research facility in 1967. It's now been found in almost 30 states in the United States and in 4 Canadian provinces. It's spread from the Colorado research facility almost coast to coast, and unlike many human or wildlife diseases which are caused by a bacteria or a virus, CWD, or chronic wasting disease, is caused by a misfolded protein called a prion. Other prion diseases that include bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or mad cow disease in cattle, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans, and scrapie in sheep. In these diseases, these misfolded prion proteins cause normal proteins to misfold, and it leads to a chain reaction, which those proteins then accumulate in the central nervous system. It causes cell death and the loss of nervous system function. Prion diseases are very difficult to treat or diagnose in the early stages of the disease. And in the case of chronic wasting disease, there are no known treatments, vaccines, or cures that are available. If that wasn't enough, there's also no practical live animal or carcass-side tests that would enable managers to diagnose CWD in the field.
Will deer exhibit symptoms of CWD, though, that would be easy to identify?
They will exhibit symptoms in the latter stages of the disease. Chronic wasting is, as the name sounds, they look very unthrifty. They lose weight, lose neurological function. Although there's no known link between human diseases and chronic wasting disease, hunters should be aware of some things that need to be done, some precautions when they go afield and are harvesting deer.
In respect to helping to curb its spread or attempting to do so anyway, what are some things hunters should consider?
Well, one of the most important things that the Department of Wildlife and Parks and Tourism has suggested and promoted is the use of electronic deer check-in. That's a system where a hunter can use a smartphone, take a couple of digital images of the harvested animal. One is a close-up image with the animal being tagged, where you can read the tag on the animal, and then the other image would be a zoomed-out image where you could see the entire carcass of the deer or elk so that the sex of the animal could be known. They also suggest to debone the carcass and leave the carcass at the kill site. That's sometimes not allowed by the private landowners whose property you may be hunting on, but it is also a good technique for hunters to observe if it's allowed. Then they also suggest that the carcass not be transported from a county that has been known to have chronic wasting disease to other counties. Keep in mind, this has been in Kansas since 2001 when it was found in a captive bull elk in Harper County, and it's been now found in most counties in the western half of the state. After the 2015 and 2016 seasons, chronic wasting disease prevalence was calculated to be between 10 and 20%, with a 95% confidence in bucks that were 2.5 years old or older in the northwest part of the state. So that's a pretty high prevalence. They've not done surveillance in all of counties in Kansas, but I suspect surveillance is going to be something that will be continuing to happen.
So those are things that folks might think about in the localized sense as they hunt deer to try to, once again, keep chronic wasting disease from gaining more ground in this state. But there are efforts, you say, to control CWD on the national level. Experts have come up with a checklist of actions to consider here.
Yes, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies have put together a very lengthy report on best management practices for the prevention, surveillance, and management of chronic wasting disease. Best management practices for prevention of chronic wasting disease introduction and establishment, limiting live animal movement because that's regarded as the greatest risk for CWD introduction into unaffected areas. They also suggest carcass movement that poses a risk and suggest some of the things that Wildlife and Parks has implemented. The surveillance is CWD testing, both for captive animals and surveillance in natural populations. And if hunters are concerned, and as many should be, if they suspect they've harvested a deer or elk that might have chronic wasting disease, Kansas State Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory will continue to do CWD testing. There's a fee associated with that, but if you contact them, they can provide you information on what tissue samples and how to collect those samples and how they should be submitted. The management would include a CWD response plan. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of things that fit into the management plan. Most state agencies are in the process of developing or have already developed a CWD management plan, but frankly, it's not been adequate enough to stop the spread.
Again, deer hunters, it's something that you need to be on the watch for as you attempt to take your deer for this season, and that is the signs of chronic wasting disease. And Charlie, we appreciate the background on this, as always. Charlie Lee, Wildlife Specialist, K-State Research and Extension. And once more, our time is away for another edition. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be right back here this same time tomorrow. Hope you'll rejoin us then. Meantime, Eric Atkinson bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.